Gabe, Tahi and Sprite won 6 out of 7 games this past weekend in the FNCS Opens, so let's see how they did it. I'm pretty sure everyone's aware, but these guys landed at Sweaty Sands. In the first game, they were uncontested. Now remember, this first game is usually a W key game for the majority of teams, and for Gabe, Tahi and Sprite, this was absolutely no different. Once they had looted the uncontested Sweaty Sands, they grabbed a car and rotated out, which is something they did pretty much every single game. They pushed past the spire, but no one was really in there, so they found a fight on this hill to the south of it. Now notice that rather than going straight up to the hill underneath them, they decided to wrap all the way around the right and get up onto the hill to ensure they weren't going to get held as they ramped up while third-partying this fight. Most people would probably just start building up in this area right here, but instead they took their extra time to ensure they had a little bit better verticality. Now game 1 was a W key game, and for these guys, these fights aren't very difficult, so they cleaned this one up relatively quickly. Rotations in these kind of games aren't very important because these guys are just looking to get into as many fights as possible, so they're actually making most of the time bad rotations to get into these kind of spots. But one thing that is very true is that a lot of the times they won't be deep in zone fighting because that doesn't help them out getting a lot of eliminations, but what they'll do is they'll just get a little bit ahead of the closing zones and then hold players who are further back. This will make them panic and allow you to pick up relatively easy eliminations. A very basic play, but something that these guys do quite a lot while rotating, in particular at the third zone. And another factor of their gameplay that's really important is their use of the bows. Now, nearly always every single game that they played, they had multiple bows in their inventories. You can see that both Gabe and Tahi have mechanical bows in this first game, while as Sprite has a harpoon. We'll see this a lot in the next few games too. In this first game, there's still quite a few people alive, being 41 people currently in the 4th zone. So what you need to notice is that they're being very careful while attacking walls. It's very easy for them to get third party here, so they tunnel all the way over to start box fighting people. Earlier on in the game, you can build fight people all you want, but at this point when there's so many people around, you want to make sure all your angles are still covered. They just grab height in 5th zone because, let's be real, it's a W key game, they can really do whatever they want, they command this lobby, and from then on out, they don't just maintain high ground like they normally would going for the Victory Royale. Because it's that first lobby, they drop down, be more aggressive on walls, and take more fights than they would in a finals, for example. So this allows them to pick up a massive 29 eliminations. Now for a first game, this is actually a lot lower than some other top level pro teams that we see, but still a very good start to the tournament. Now that the W key game was out of the way, how did they change up their strategies going forward into these more difficult higher elo games? Well, they dropped the same drop spot, which was Sweaty Sands, and this should be no surprise to anyone who knows this team at all. But this time, rather than rotating to center to get a fight, they actually rotated to the west side of the map, the fancy view house, to upgrade their makeshift shotguns. This got them all up to blue makeshift shotguns, then they were able to upgrade to a purple pump using mechanical parts. The reason they didn't do this in their first game, their W key game, is because you get really good loot from W keying anyway. Rather, in this game, they weren't going to be W keying, so they weren't going to get this loot, so they had a backup plan in action to be able to upgrade to those purple shotguns so that they had that good loot anyway. Tahi goes back to challenge Shade, who is in Sweaty Sands, to get the purple assault rifle, so they are completely stacked this game. Again, they have the double bow on Tahi and Sprite, but Tahi has the fire bow this time. So they end up actually fighting a team in the exact same position as game 1, just purely by coincidence I'm pretty sure this time, and they pick up a relatively easy 3 eliminations. Now this is where their real strategy starts to unveil. This game, they position themselves extremely high in 4th zone just by ramping over a team who is already there. This way, if they pull 5th zone, they already have height. Zone ends up being max distance, so remember those bows we talked about? Well, Sprite ends up hitting a headshot bow on the player on high ground, allowing them just to ramp up and claim it. Notice how protected he is while building over here though. This goes back to what we were saying before about box fighting in the 4th zone. Anytime you're in the 4th or 5th zone, you have to be extremely careful that you don't get lobby focused because there are just so many players around you. And yes, that means you may have to waste some materials. From then on, this is a pretty standard win for them. Just maintain high ground, pressure down below, and pick up a Victory Royale. So what about game 3? Well, game 3 was pretty much exactly the same. They saw an opening for height free in 5th as another team was ramping for it. Then being behind them, they just ramped right up themselves and claimed it at 5th zone. From here on, it's pretty simple. They managed to maintain height all the way through by keeping ahead, spraying down below, pressuring the opponents, and then just winning. Then at the end, Gabe stays up while Tahi and Sprite drop down for elims, and he has the 4 floppers in the medkit, so if need be, he could win the heal off. Doesn't come down to this, and they end up actually just picking up the Victory Royale regardless. After 3 Victory Royales in a row, game 4 is where things turn upside down a little bit. They don't manage to claim height during 4th or 5th zone, and while getting ahead, Tahi is sprayed down into someone's box and unfortunately eliminated. Gabe and Sprite, now without their main fragger, do pop off as a duo, in particular Gabe managing to pick up a lot of eliminations. However, they do not manage to secure the Victory Royale and end up placing 5th in this match. In Game 5, they end up pulling the 5th zone while they've already claimed that high ground early. Does this seem familiar to you yet? But the key takeaway from this game is that they noticed there was a team to their north who was also in contention for the high ground, so they all intentionally just focused and sprayed down onto this team to ensure that the one team that was potentially going to challenge them could not any longer. This is the first time we see a real prominent split on high ground, with one player to the far one side, one player to the complete other side, and another player at the back. This enables them to get multiple angles as possible to spray down on the players down below. And obviously, they won this game as well. In Game 6, the second to last game that they played, you can notice what are they doing yet again? Looking up to claim high ground in 4th zone. This is the 4th out of 6th game that they managed to do this, by the way. Oh, and yes, they do it in the final game as well. So that's 5 out of the 7 games they look to take high in the 4th zone. The difference between these games is that in Game 6 they pull that 5th zone, so get some fantastic RNG again, but in Game 7 they actually don't pull the zone, they get a complete max zone. In Game 6 they keep hype from there, and then they win. There's not much to break down in this one. But Game 7, their final game, is what was actually very, very interesting, because finally they didn't have the blessed RNG of that 4th and 5th zone height retakes. As soon as that 5th zone pops and they don't have it, they make an instant rotate to try and get to the other side of the hill. They actually managed to maintain a relatively high layer while doing this to avoid being shot, which I thought was relatively interesting. And this preserved a lot of their materials too. On rotate, they get completely beamed and Gabe actually gets knocked out, but they do manage to actually pick up the res on him, so this doesn't completely ruin their final game and ruin the chance at winning 6 out of 7 matches. Because they pull a max distance zone, they're currently at the MAC, but the team on height didn't do a very good job of looking back to see where these players were. This left Gabe, Tahi and Sprite open to just walking up their own builds, getting a little build fight going on, and easily claiming height this way. I hope you can see that every single game that they took high ground, they won from here on out, and that this is clearly a hugely focused part of their plan. This should also be something that's part of your plan in your Opens gameplay, because the quality of players generally is lower. There's also not that many players alive in the lobby in these moving zones in comparison to something super stacked. So it's very easy if you get focused if you're on low or mid ground, because you're a lot more open. There's not as many builds to make your way through. So for Gabe, Tahi and Sprite in this match, they managed to maintain that high ground all the way through because the zones kept pulling back, and they just kept fighting the players down below as much as possible. However, Tahi and Gabe actually end up being eliminated this game and go down, so it's left for Sprite to clutch up the final 1v1v1. Luckily it is all solos left alive, so it's not the end of the world, and because they claimed high ground earlier, he still has it. It's Wild Week apparently in Fortnite, which means that the flame bow has been buffed to do 15 damage per shot, and this was a critical part of this victory royale. Notice that everyone was in wood down below, so Sprite just kept firing those arrows down below, burning everyone in existence. Everyone knew that this had been buffed coming into it, but these guys used this bow so well, so much earlier than a lot of other players. Now, a lot of other players have learned this. If you watch any other game from the FCS currently this weekend, they figured out how strong the flame bow is, but Gabe, Tahi and Sprite were ahead of the meta and ahead of all of the plans, using that flame bow just to burn the wood down below and pick up their last victory royale of the day. Hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned a lot. Peace!